When I saw parkour for the first time, I immediately thought that it was just stupid and unnecessarily dangerous, and that's actually exactly why I started to do it. And then I wouldn't realize whether or not this initial assumption was correct until I actually started doing it, and when I did, I realized that the answer to this is actually way more nuanced than you might immediately think. When I first started training parkour, I was probably like 9 years old, and I remember I would always be training at like recess time during elementary school. I would be in the playground doing flips off of shit. It was pretty fun. Now keep in mind, I wasn't that good at the time since I was very young and I just started, so like at most I might be doing front flips off of stuff like cartwheels, shit like that. But I was having fun and I was training every day, just getting gradually better. At least that's how it should have gone. The reality is every single day it was a struggle to try and look over my back and make sure the stupid recess monitors weren't preventing me from having fun, because apparently using parkour in my recess time was too dangerous. And this of course made 10-year-old me really resent these recess monitors or fun guards. Basically I thought they were just a bunch of mean old bullies that didn't want me to have any fun. But you know, as I've grown more mature and older, I've kind of changed my perspective on this. Just kidding, those recess monitors were a bunch of Why parkour is dangerous. One, if you don't know how to properly break your fall, then jumping from a height could actually, not be very safe at all. Because if you don't know how to save yourself when you're jumping off of a height, one little mishap could absolutely result in you breaking a bone. Additionally, if you're jumping on objects that are multiple stories above the ground, like if you're on buildings or something, then it could absolutely be dangerous. Two, if you don't have teachers, then you're not going to know what you're doing. This is becoming a lot less of the problem in the age of the internet when there's channels just like this one teaching you how to do everything. But to give you an example, we're going to start with like the Kong Vault. The way you properly do a Kong Vault is by jumping towards a wall, treating it like a handstand and grabbing the wall and then pushing it away from you. If you're not doing it correctly, like say you're just tapping the block and then jumping over it, which a lot of beginners do, it's actually one of the most common mistakes I see. It can be really hard to know what you're doing wrong because you don't have, an instructor right there to tell you that you're doing it wrong. And this could lead to you hurting yourself one day if you try to do a Kong off of something that's really high up. But if you're practicing with an instructor, then he can just tell you that you're doing it wrong and it'll save, a lot of struggle. 3, training outside of your limits is a recipe for disaster. If you don't know your limits, then training outside of them is actually extremely dangerous, and that's how a ton of injuries you see happen. If you ever see those parkour fail compilations, like the one I just reacted to a couple days ago, you can go watch that. The majority of the clips are just fails because people were training way too far outside of their limits. Granted, most of the parkour fails you see are just not so slightly intoxicated people doing dumb shit. 4, training inside of your limits is a recipe for disaster. I know, you really can't win with this shit. A lot of the fails you see come from training outside of your limits, and that accounts for a lot of them, but it can be equally as possible for those fails to come from training inside of your limits. Let me explain what I'm talking about. If you deem a jump too easy or a flip too easy, and then you only put half of your focus into it because you just think, it's whatever, you're thinking about something else, then you're outside of the kind of flow state required to be safe, and this can lead to a lot of injuries because you're not actually focusing on what you're doing. And the reality is when you're jumping between two objects or doing a flip that causes you to be inverted and over your head for a decent amount of time, this isn't a very good idea. So basically, even if you consider something easy, you should never half-ass it because it's just never going to end well. I'm of course the exception to this because I'm the best tracer in the world, so pretty much any jump comes easy to me. Now, if you were paying attention to everything I just said, then you'll know that there was a common theme to every single point I mentioned about parkour being unsafe. And if you didn't notice because you don't pay attention to anything, you have no attention span, that's perfectly fine because I'm actually about to tell you what the correlation between all the things are. The common theme is that every single thing I just mentioned is an example of practicing the sport incorrectly. So now I'm just going to dive into every single one and explain how there aren't really reasons parkour is unsafe. 1, if you don't properly break your fall, you can get hurt. This is absolutely true, but parkour offers all kinds of different ways that you can break your fall in the event that you're falling. The most prominent of these is the shoulder roll. So the shoulder roll is used in multiple ways. 1, if you're taking a big jump, then it can be used to disperse the impact of your landing and make it so it's just not as hard on your joints. This is what allows people to do flips off of multiple stories and just roll out of it and seemingly be fine. And then the other use case of the shoulder roll is to save yourself. Say you're doing a front flip or something, you don't commit it perfectly, and you're just falling towards the ground, towards your face. If you know a shoulder roll, you'll know. Throw your hands on the ground, roll over whatever shoulder, wherever way you're falling, and you'll be fine. Basically, it can completely stop you from face planting. And then there's also the slap landing. That's where you jump off an object and just slap the ground while sinking down. Because when you land and you sink down on your knees, this is a pretty natural human instinct to sink down when you land. And then slapping the ground also I don't even know why that works. I just know it works. Whatever. But slap landings should only be used for smaller jumps. 2, if you don't have access to teachers, you won't know what you're doing. This is another example of just not training properly. All you really have to do is just get yourself a teacher and you'll be perfectly fine. And if you don't have access to a parkour teacher, which I do understand a lot of people don't, the internet has plenty of options for you to go to. That's kind of the goal for this channel, to kind of help people train when they don't exactly have gyms, because I know that's a large majority. I get a lot of people commenting, talking about how they don't live near a gym. 3, training outside of your limits is a recipe for disaster. This one's actually pretty obvious, which is just train inside your limits. It's not that hard. Granted, it's a little hard to know what your limits are as a beginner, so I'm gonna try my best to try and explain to you how you can kind of gauge what your limits are. In the context of parkour, usually it's pretty simple. If I'm trying to do a jump, I'll just jump on the side of it to make sure. And then also, if you're out training in public, you're not in a gym, make sure you test the objects first, because if you don't test the object you're jumping on, it's impossible to know if it's stable. A lot of parkour fails you see online are people jumping perfectly, but then falling off the object because it slips. We don't want that to happen. And then since flips are more my territory, if I don't know whether or not I'll be able to land a flip, I'll just make sure I drill a ton of prerequisites to it, so flips that are kind of close before the flip. So for example, if it was a back full, I would be drilling back tuck and like Arabian. You don't really need Arabian for back full, but it helps. Yeah, so just being over prepared with the prerequisites tends to help a ton. With the example of triple full, a lot of people will hurt themselves on triple full because they just started landing their double full and they're like, okay, I'll just throw a triple. I make this mistake a lot with the example of Randy, which is kind of like triple full. It's 1/2 less twist. It's a front flip with 2.5 twists. I hurt my ankle a while ago trying Randy, and that's because I just wasn't comfortable enough with the prerequisites. I had landed Rudy plenty before, but there was definitely more I could have done to kind of get ready for the Randy. Lastly, training inside of your limits is a recipe for disaster. This one's also a pretty obvious solution, and that's just that whenever you're training, make sure that you're devoting all of your brain power into what you're doing. You're not getting super distracted with other things around you. A lot of fails will come from just like messing around and also like doing something simple that you know you can do, like a backflip, but just not paying attention and then falling and hurting yourself. And we don't want that to happen. That being said, I know this is definitely easier said than done, because most of the time when you're just doing easy flips and not paying attention to them, it's because you're with other people and you just want to focus on that more. And I myself am very guilty of doing this. That being said, it should be noted that I am the best tracer in the world, so it's not much of an issue for me. But for you mortals out there, you might want to work on that. On being safe, I just want to share one more personal thing, and that's that I've been doing parkour for the majority of my life. I've been doing it since I was like 9 years old. I'm 16 now, almost 17, so that's like about 7 years. So not quite the majority of my life, but just about a lot of my life I've been doing parkour. And in all of that time, I've had, I think, 1 injury, and that was just last year. It was my big ankle injury. Obviously, I've gotten hurt before, but big injury that actually took me out for a couple months. The only one I've ever had was last year. Besides that injury, the second biggest one I had was when I hyperextended my leg, and that took me out for I think 2 days. I couldn't do flips. I think that was it though. I couldn't walk for a little while, which wasn't fun, but I don't really consider that to be a huge injury because it didn't take me out for that long. Basically, the reason that happened is because I was at a parkour jam. It was like a Halloween parkour jam, so there was a ton of kids there. Parents had like dropped off their kids to do whatever parents do on Halloween. So yeah, there was a ton of kids. There was probably like 30, 35-ish kids in the entire gym. And I was on a 4-foot tall about wooden platform, and I was trying to do a front flip off of it. There was a mat on the ground, but unfortunately that does not really help when it comes to hyperextensions, as I learned. Obviously, since there were, oodles and doodles of little kids on everywhere, I wasn't exactly paying full attention, because if I flip onto a kid and take him out, that's my fault. Being older and actually training. So I was very focused on all these kids running around that I wasn't really focused on the trick. Keep in mind, I was probably like 11 or 12 at this time. I went to do the front flip and I opened just a little bit late, and then I landed, and if you pretend this is my ankle joint, just a little too far. Since I had already known front flip at the time, I was I kind of took it for granted, and then I also wasn't paying full attention because of the kids there. So if you think about it, this really was just a recipe for disaster. So to bring it all the way back to the question that I posed at the beginning of this video, is parkour safe? The truth is, injuries in parkour are inevitable, but while you're training, your goal should be to mitigate these injuries as much as you can, and through the tools offered to you through parkour, as well as just common sense, you can really greatly mitigate the risk of these injuries. And parkour, in reality, is about as safe as you make it to be. So for most people, it's just as safe as any other sport out there, if not safer. Like if you compare parkour to football or something, parkour is way safer since you're the only one in control of what you're doing. If you want to train reckless, you can make parkour extremely dangerous, like those Russians you see on Instagram. Or if you want to train like me and train like a bitch, then parkour doesn't really need to be dangerous at all.